My name is Andre Soluri. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Future of Practice Committee. Jacob Rydell, who is my other co-chair, is up at the GSD today and couldn't join us, but he sends his regards and has been an integral part in tonight's event, so we're sorry he's not here. So for those of you that are not familiar, the Future of Practice is one of, I think we have 22 committees here at AAA New York, and we are a relatively new-ish committee. We meet every month. If you'd like to join us, if you like what you see, it's open to members and to those who are affiliated to come join. We talk about a combination of technology and the practice and profession of architecture, and all of the things that are difficult to talk about are things we love to talk about. So we've had prior events on the value of architects, sort of asking what the value is, the agency of architects, discussing, debating, questioning what that is, and maybe where it should be and where it isn't. And the other, and we're going to be doing an upcoming event on risk, and it's not about getting good insurance. It's sort of about structural issues in why, as a profession, we're so afraid to take risks, and is that potentially devaluing us as professionals and also decreasing our agency, which are all things that have come out of our other events. But the other thing we've been doing is talking a lot about AI. So some of you may have seen, we had an event here about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. It was, I think, one of the first big symposiums on architecture and AI. And that was an all-day event that was really pretty extraordinary. And as a follow-up to that, we've come up with this idea of a quarterly AI salon. So this is our second one. And the first one was on value and values in AI. And we have 2 more coming up. But I'd like to introduce Jinru, who is one of our 2 co-committee members who are sort of leading the charge on this, which when you co-chair a committee is really the thing that you want. So thank you very much. Her and John Mukesh, who's now on the West Coast, have been the 2 that have been leading the charge. So thank you for that. And also, make sure you tell them about that, because that is kind of neat. So thank you all, and then take it away.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I'll just give a really quick opening statement to sort of kickstart today's conversation. Like Andrew introduced, my name is Xingru. I'm actually one of the 3 co-organizers of the series, is Dennis Sheldon, who's here with us, also the moderator of tonight, and John and I. So yeah, welcome everyone to join this second event in this year-long AI+A Salon series. Tonight we're going to dive into the topic of environmental intelligence. This term can mean different things depending on the context. But in our world of AECO, we're talking about how data, smart systems, and of course AI are transforming the built environment. From building performance to energy optimizations to sensor-rich responsive spaces, data and AI is becoming embedded in the very environment we work and live in. So please join me to welcome our moderator. Dennis, do you guys want to come to the stage? And the panelists, please come. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the amazing team that organized these events. So like I mentioned, Dennis is here with us as moderator. John, who sadly couldn't join us in person because he moved to the very sunny West Coast. I also want to extend my gratitude to the rest of the committee, the co-chairs, Andrea and Jacobs, and the fellow of other committee members to help us create this series and help us organize these events. And of course, amazing staff of AIA New York, Samantha, Suzanne, and their team. Without them, we couldn't really make it possible. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Let's get started. I'll just oh yeah, about the the screen. So that's kind of a tradition so far. It's a little like live word cloud, and it's basically document monitoring our conversations and just try to get a word cloud depending on the frequency. Complete start from scratch. If anyone have comment, let me know. Just to kind of let us know what's going on and provide a little bit of entertainment. And now.
How does it work?
So basically monitoring the conversation, recording kind of very short clip, and then extracting the high frequency word. It's open source on GitHub. If you want to clone that, feel free to do it. I can provide a link. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let me tee this up a little bit. This topic of environmental intelligence has been a source of kind of rumination and fascination of mine for a very long time. My background, I've had a pretty long career in sort of following what we thought would be the BIM revolution, and has turned out to be just the BIM thing. So the reason that I got really excited about BIM was partly its ability to forge new types of potential collaborations and streamlining across the collaborative development of buildings, from architects to engineers to all the different stakeholders in the process. And it always felt to me like, what happens after this? What happens to the data and that possibility of integration as you move past, design, development, and contracts and actual construction? Is there a role both for the digital assets, and is there a possibility of continuing that integration of domains and interests somehow beyond the design and engineering and construction phase? So that possibility of the digital assets living on after the delivery building was always a sort of fascination to me. And the possibility of an intelligent asset that is part of the physical product of building seemed like an inevitable consequence. And I think there are people here that can talk about some of that. The other thing that's always struck me is that, architects, I believe, we all get into this business because we want to impact the world, and we want to impact the societies and communities that are in the world. But I think we have to face it that the scope of architecture, at least in the traditional sense, is very far removed. After design development, there's a whole host of people and machines and transactions and activities. And then one day, as I remember, the architects that I work with saying, you hand the keys to the owner and they say, well, maybe you can visit, but you got to check in with us. And actually, why don't you just move along and do this and go on to your next project? And your work becomes the asset owned by the organizations that own them and the communities that live in them. And so that intent to impact the world seems very far removed in the traditional process. But what if it wasn't, right? What if the scope of the architects is somehow persist into the actual operations and the ongoing life of this building? And how would that change the relationship between architects, the products that we design, for lack of a better term, and the people and the organizations that live in them, right? So that seems to be a possibility now of technology, and now with the proliferation of sensors and the ability to make sense of information and to query the building on an ongoing basis, I think it really sort of suggests new possibilities for the role of the architect. But now there's a new agent in the world as well, which is this AI business, right? And the AI also has agency. So we're dealing with not just the building professionals and the owners and the occupants of the buildings, but this intelligent thing that is sort of taking on autonomy and agency and becoming part of the asset, but becoming not just this sort of mute technology that's part of the digital twin, but is becoming kind of an active collaborator in the mix. So I think there's a clear possibility for AI infusing both the continuum of design to delivery, but also infusing the environment, the places, the buildings, the systems themselves. And I think that as an additional component has the potential to profoundly impact what we do as designers, what are the products that we're delivering, and what is our potential ongoing role with these assets as we set them forth into the world. And so that's really, I think, the tee up for this discussion, I hope. We have a really interesting and very diverse set of speakers, and I will say that, one of my great feelings is I'm horrible at doing introductions. So fortunately, we've asked all of the panelists to introduce themselves. There's also terrific bios on the website associated with this event that I won't read for you, but if you see it, it's worth a read. I'm going to very briefly list their names, and then they're each going to talk, and their titles, and then they're going to introduce themselves and their work and their perspective on this. We'll ask a series of questions. I think this will be a very dynamic discussion, and we'll certainly open it up for not just Q&A, but really, hopefully, a dialogue with all of you, and thank you for coming. So very briefly, from on the far right, Sarah Maston is a director in the Commissioning and Energy Division of Colliers, a very large engineering firm that I knew very little about, but very, very impactful, and she can talk more of that. Maybe more significantly, she's the incoming 2026 president of ASHRAE, and has said that AI is a big piece of what she intends to do with ASHRAE over her tenure. So we're really interested in hearing from her. Aile Burgess on the left is Regional Design Technology Director for Gensler. Gensler, I think, has been one of the innovators in this space, and she can talk more about that. She's based in New York. When I met her, this was really, I think, a focus of hers personally about 5 years ago. I know it's still part of her portfolio. Chrysula Kapelonis, okay, thank you. Okay, should have rehearsed that. Is at Google, at the Google Home team. She was formerly, I know, at the Media Lab at MIT, and at Google, she is leading design for home intelligence, so a super interesting perspective. And then also sort of in that technology direction, Kostas Tsamis is Director of Product at SaltMine. SaltMine is a software as a service platform for corporate real estate design, planning, and management. So I think if you imagine the kind of Venn diagram of these experts, it's going to be a truly interesting discussion. So I'm going to now sit down and shut up, and somehow the magic happens, or do I hit a button or something? Seems like somebody needs to hit a button. All right, let me try a button. Okay, all right, I figured it out.
It's actually this.
It's not. Okay,
no
I hit the wrong
worry.
button. Okay.
All right, so yeah, that's it. So yeah, just as Dennis said, a little bit about what I do with my day job. I've been in this industry for a little over 25 years. I started out as an HVAC design engineer, and quickly found out that in many design firms, the engineers who are basically developing the drawings aren't on the site very often. They don't necessarily get to see what they're designing and how it kind of impacts not only like the architecture, how does it, kind of make things happen. And I quickly became a little disenchanted with the design side, but shortly found myself on the commissioning side. And I think, with most of you being in the room, I'm assuming architects might understand what that is. Others might not. But so our group, we pretty much get involved during design. We help the design engineer of record pretty much think through all of the sequences of operations, how the design is supposed to work based on what the architect and the owner have come to define as the project success or the requirements for the project. And then we pretty much continue with the project through construction. So similar to, I think, what Dennis is saying is, you know, on the architecture side, not only being involved on the design, but then also helping the owner as well. So, you know, we are really part of that linchpin that links the design to the actual construction to the operation. Because, you know, when we're doing design reviews, we're looking at things as far as maintenance and accessibility. Right now, we're going through a refrigerant phase out that, you know, as architects, you may or may not be familiar with, nor may you care, but it will matter because there's going to be additional things that are going to require that are going to take up floor space and additional shafts for ventilation and different things. So we're not going to get into the weeds of it, but unlike when I was just a design engineer, being on the commissioning side really allows me to, and my team, to be engaged from design all the way through to that operations piece and how what we are turning over to owners as far as what is helpful for that building operation long term. Because the research says that within 5 or 6 years of a building coming online, it is already out of spec from an MEP standpoint.
Next up, there's 2 buttons. Will you have a phone slide?
Hi, everybody. I'm Isla. I'm an architect and happen to kind of be good at digital stuff. My dad was a computer science. About 14 years ago, I just kind of fell into teaching people how to do computer stuff and architecture stuff at the same time. And that has turned into basically what Dennis was alluding to, that I think these assets that we create aren't just instruments of service to be done with the CDs and get the thing built, but honestly, when the thing is built, it's when its life starts, very much like the systems that are operating, the people in the space are also just getting started. It's not the end of a project, it's the life of the project, and it's kind of starting. So that really fascinated me as to how does space change? How does the use of space change? How do people kind of go through different cadences in space? And I think it was maybe 7 years ago that we were 17? Yeah. So then COVID hit, and you know, we were doing all this stuff with sensors, and then it was like, get them all in there, then it was like, keep them all separated, now it's all, get them all back in there. So just that continual cycle of like space changes, how we use the space change, proximity, cultural stuff changes how we use space. So that just really fascinates me, and that's kind of why I got into what we're gonna talk about tonight, which is really just understanding and maybe second guessing and catching what our intuition is with some data and backing that up, and then being able to explain that to people maybe that need to see numbers and need to see the data. So it's kind of that alignment.
Is that you? That is you.
That was me.
Should we talk about that?
Nah.
It's worth a read, though.
I know. We'll get into it.
All right.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm actually very excited to be amongst this very diverse group. You guys did a great job kind of assembling a very vast Venn diagram of people. I like calling myself a systems designer. I am trained in architecture. I did the full gamut. And then I think through kind of going through that training, I realized that we're not having a discourse with like technology as a material for the built environment. So there was a moment where I was like, I don't really want to engage in traditional practice. I really want to engage in this discussion. Interaction design, spatial computing, sensing, sensor fusion. And so that's why I call myself a systems designer, because it's not really clear that I fall in whatever bucket it is. I'm really interested in these very complex systems. And yeah, a lot of what I do is very much shaping how intelligence gets imbued into the physical environment, whether it's inputs, outputs, ontologies, whether it's like, interaction design, like playful, delightful things. So if you go to the next slide, I have like some examples of my work. As you can see, like, I think the beautiful thing about the built environment is it's both immersive. It's sensorial, it's animated, you kind of experience it through time, through narrative, and I think it's sort of very ripe for technology to be able to affect it and affect the human experience. So I think my focus is very deeply on what is that going to be, especially as our buildings can start responding back to us. So.
Kostas' office.
Hello, everyone. It's me. My name is Kostas. I've come from the architectural background, master's, bachelor's, everything. I was part of this BEAM thing. I'm now at Saltmine, a SaaS software company. Why I ended up there is actually an interesting story. I practiced architecture for many years, my own practice. Somehow I ended up with WeWork and always looking for the data side of things. So it was like always, what if? What if this data? Did we explore this option or anything? So somehow this brought me into technology. I was part of the BEAM thing, as I said, and now I guess I'm part of the AI thing. So Saltmine is a company which, you can skip to the next slide actually. The next button. Maybe there's not a slide. I screwed up. No, that you didn't. No, it's fine. I can talk about it. But Saltmine is a platform where we help large enterprise corporations. We talk mostly about office space, really modernize the way they work on the ways of planning, designing, and managing corporate real estate. We're venturing into other kind of types of real estate as well, but corporate offices are main thing. We're in an era, as everyone says, that we have a lot of data. I think we're in an era of data noise. So we're just trying to make sense of the data there through our platform. So I'm building product there. A lot of nice things to discuss. Very good panel here. Really interesting to see how architects venturing out from the architecture into technology. And one more thing, which is very interesting. I've been part of these panels. And I would say around the end of 2022 will be a discussion about health or architecture, everything. And at the end, there will be a question, what about AI? Are you using AI? And now we're getting to a point where we have a panel specifically on AI. So I think we're getting to a point where AI will be an embedded part of what we're discussing. So it's not the AI thing, it's just in the weeds of what we do. So yeah, glad to be here.
Okay, so so the first question is, it's a softball one. Take it where you will. But but it's focused on today and the impending future, right? So how is this intersection of sensors, data, operational existence, and the inclement impact of AI impacting constituencies that are important for you guys, either your clients or, I guess, the role that you guys represent, right? So take it where you will.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of alluded to it a little bit with the last 5 years story of just bring them all together, keep them all separated, bring them all together. I think there's a lack of confidence, I would say, that we can help reassure through the process of having sensors and mapping that to space, and that you might not want to build something that's completely permanent. You might want to have something that's adaptable, or just think about what ifs and how do you organize people and how do they, return to office and all these pieces. So I think a lot of it has really helped our engagement, is just to say these are options and everything doesn't have to be so concrete as the built environment sometimes feels like. So I think adaptability and sort of that ability to pivot and have the design knowledge, and especially with our clients, that they know that the space can pivot, that it has this flexibility inherently in it, even though it doesn't look like it's all rotating walls or something like that. It's designed with that thinking of we can expand, we can contract, we can bring other people together. So I think that's been a major part of kind of the solidity that this type of data and bringing this kind of, the ability to also stitch onto the instruments of service, the BIM model or any other 3D model, being able to stitch that onto the model and then show time as an asset of this is life of a building, I think becomes really important. I think a lot of the time you can get to, the mechanical system is a lot more, maybe not, but measurable in my mind. Like it's very, there's math and you can prove it out kind of thing, as people are a little bit trickier. So interactions and how people are engaging and how they're using the space and how that is happening has really become part of the more frequent conversations that we've had. And I think being able to visualize that in multiple ways brings that confidence and that kind of a surety when they're investing in space and architecture and design and kind of going for things like that.
So naively, I've always thought of Gensler as a very, you do really well with owners. You have a very strong relationship that's often ongoing, right? Some of this feels like it's about projection into the future, but it's not like, oh, let's go design. I mean, it's before that, right? Like, what do owners want to know about the future through the data that you're able to collect about the present and the past?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to real estate and investment and how much square footage they've got now, how much square footage might they need, this is where it's going. And what's really happened, I would say, for us in the last 5-6 years is the consultative piece before we get to here's all the spaces, here's all the offices, here's all the people, here's all the departments. A lot of it is like, well, where's your business going? And how do we use this data to get to predictive so you don't shed 2 floors now, but then come back and need 4 when you hit your growth spurt in 2 years from your business projections. So there's a lot. I think AI in general is doing this, but it's getting us into different conversations and it's giving us the ability to stitch different bits of data that were never meant to come together to have those conversations. And it's not just us, but it's us with others pulling things together to have a more holistic picture, I would say. But very predictive at that stage.
Is there any sort of difference in the services that Gensler offers that is sort of part of this kind of longer term?
Yeah, I would say we have, at least for our office here, we have a whole studio that just focuses on the consultative strategy piece before we get to the design piece, yeah.
I think I'm very much on the opposite side of the spectrum in a very interesting way. For context, I work on smart home. And I think where to your point, the constituents there are essentially the people who live in the home. And, they're also the kind of like owners or the integrators or the operators, they're kind of the entire stack that I think within commercial or kind of, in non-home residential buildings like tend to be. So I think what's really interesting about that is like proving the value out and like understanding incrementally, somebody might be like, oh, I'm looking to make sure my home's okay, so I'll get a bunch of security cameras. Or, I'm looking to optimize like my energy footprint. So I get a thermostat, but it's sort of done in this really piecemeal way. And I think what's interesting as we start to kind of like prove out the value of something like the smart home, it's like, how do we start to talk about how all of these solutions get stitched together rather than just being these like very deep verticals? I love what you said earlier, Sarah, about post-occupancy. Like, I think I'm very much that, right? When I've been obsessed with post-occupancy as part of the discourse of architecture for a while, and I think being in smart home, that's basically all we do. So in that case, it's kind of like, how do you empower the people who live within the home to both basically understand a lot more about their home or be able to enact change or animate parts of, what they're trying to basically solve for. So where this gets really interesting is like in post-occupancy, it's always really about like, how do things change over time? Like, we don't have the ability to understand, hey, like we can't standardize the building in that case with all the hardware, all the equipment, and that's kind of the challenge on our end is like, how do you start to provide solutions where it's helpful for somebody who has 1 camera, helpful for somebody who has like 500 devices in the home, and like even along the way, it's still able to provide help. And I think this is where the conversation around like more, I think AI is very interesting for a lot of ways for the built environment, but like for different application spaces, which is like for the first time we're able to have something more generalized, understand inputs in a way that can structure them that is meaningful for people. I think prior to that it was like, oh, this sensor can do this, the sensor detected motion did this, but like how do you start to use all those inputs and then give back those people essentially a more clear understanding of what's actually happening. And that's where I'm very excited about in terms of where we're heading. So
I just have to throw out like one thing that we had this conversation before. What fascinates me naively about working at Google is just first of all the scale of impact you have, but also, I mean, Google has been sort of, fundamentally a leader in sort of developing that ability to bridge between the vast scale of all of humanity and the specificity of like, I'm one person, and how does that then play out when you're dealing with, a bazillion homes, right, where each one is unique and has this relationship to people? I just think, there's, I don't know if you can comment on any of that, but I said I wouldn't like put you on the spot on anything that was under NDA. So.
I think well, the way I'll take that is, kind of hearkening back to systems design. Like, I think that's why I actually deeply enjoy being an architect, because architects have to rationalize so much across systems, and also like we can't understand how spaces will be used. We kind of program them, and I love that idea of like programming, because loosely like this space is a lecture hall, but can also be used for a lot of other things, and you need to be able to design to accommodate a series of those pieces. And I think, you know, the way that I think about the smart home, or the way I just think about these technologies in general, is if you build a good enough ontology, if you build a good enough like infrastructure where you understand how it's not about specifically defining one thing or like 5 things. It's about designing the rule set, the systems, the pieces that can sort of like flex and grow and be modular. I think that's where that gets deeply interesting. And also, you know, I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day. It's like, what if I was able to go into a building and connect to the building's API? Like stuff like that I'm like deeply interested in, just like platforms rather than, you know, pointed solutions. And I think architects, a building is essentially a platform with lots of different complex systems. So that type of thinking, I think, is very useful in these cases.
So my stakeholders, right, the people I'm talking to, before I say what I believe, I'll tell you what I'm hearing. I have 2 groups of people. My stakeholders are the corporate real estate large occupiers, the likes of Google, Amazon, Fortune 500 companies. So there are 2 groups. One, which is, as I call them, the AI obsessed. They're going to come to us and say, tell us all about your AI capabilities. And I'm like, you know, you go to a restaurant, what is your vegetarian menu, right? I'm like, we cannot really distinguish that. It's part of the ingredients we have here. And then we have another group, which is the ones that don't even use the word AI. We don't know where our data goes. We have no idea about it. It's very obscure to us. So just talk traditional, you know, plain language. I'm not happy with either, because I think, I mean, a company like SaltMine is born in the AI area. It's part of what we do. We build product with that. I think it's problematic, the fact that in the modern corporate real estate world, right, where I work with, people don't realize the breadth of data which is out there. We're talking about a lot, like, you know, how the office is used, utilization data, sensors, temperature, batch swipes, a breadth of data that can make the space smarter. And we go into a phase where we were discussing with Dennis earlier, we have a traditional 10-year lease. You bother to design the space on year 1, and then you're not going to bother your architect maybe until year 9, right? Except for some small renovations that I'm sure Gensler is very busy with. So now we're getting to an era that has to be more adaptive. It has to be more frequent, the changes, because think what has happened the last 5 years, right? We went home, we went back, we went home again, we're back again. In my world, we used to say, like in corporate real estate, 2019, you have 100 employees, you need 100 desks. As simple as that. So now, if anyone can guess how many desks I need for 100 employees, good luck. I mean, different departments, mobility patterns. So we're getting to the point that the data gets so massive and complex, so we need tech that can help assess the needs. Not replacing architects or anything, it's just assess the needs. It's so complex. Thanks to Google, bring us devices, and there's a lot of more data into the game, which is great. So I really think we have 2 groups right now where I think it's going to fall somewhere in the middle, but people will realize AI is just a horizontal enabler that will really help in all aspects of our life. So that's what we're dealing with, and it's very early in the process, but I'm really kind of sensing, every time I talk to a customer or prospect, is it going to be an obsessed one, talking the AI word all the time? It's going to be one that I'm using AI and they freak out. So that's what I'm seeing in my world.
Those are all really good answers. And it's making me think, so part of what we do as part of the commissioning process and working with owners is really developing for any project a really solid owner's project requirements, right? Because everybody has an idea of what they want their project to look like. It's a matter of whether they're communicating that to the people that are going to make that happen, right? So are they sharing the vision? Because many times they're not. Most of the owners that we work with don't really have a clue what they want. They might know that they have a certain square footage or that they're going to have this kind of use space. But if there's anything we've heard is that it needs to be flexible. Just because you're going to design it one way, in 5 years they could be using a lot of those spaces completely differently. And so really kind of getting that documentation down early on, because most of the time it's asking the right questions. If you don't know the questions to ask, you're not really going to get the answers that you need. And so, kind of, either utilizing AI to kind of start those conversations, to just kind of have the format of what kind of documentation or what kind of answers you're looking for will then help manage everybody's expectations for what that project is going to deliver at the end. Because ultimately, if there's not a clear vision, you're going to get to the end of the project and the owner's going to be like, well, what is this? And you're going to be like, well, this is what you told me you wanted. And they're like, no, this isn't what I wanted, And so kind of having those conversations early, and then, having what's created as part of that, is part of that, documentation, and can be used, again, from those early design conversations to how we're going to own and operate this building, will help set everybody up for long-term success.
Can you, I know it's not your hat quite yet, but can you put your ASHRAE president hat on and talk a little bit about that community, what you're seeing, what that community is seeing in terms of the impact of AI generally, or like what do you see as
sure.
the things you got to?
We're all still trying to figure it out. In a lot of what we're seeing on the engineering standpoint is, and it has always been, revolves a lot around like the building models themselves, whether it's BIM, whether it's Revit. It's a matter of still trying to finitely get to the better answer, right? Because love or hate lead, it's driven a lot of what we are doing as far as data management goes, because previously owners have never, I won't say never, have rarely seen the value of continuing to monitor and gather the data from their building operation. So from the design side, we might have that building model, but 5 years later, we really have no idea if it's anywhere close to what we are saying that we're going to do. So, specifically for a net zero building, are we really going to get to net zero? I mean, we talk a little bit. What plays into that in the end is occupant usage, is how the people are utilizing the space. Do they understand the systems that they either have control over or don't? Like, how do you model that behavior? How do you model the fact that spaces are now completely used differently than how they were originally designed? So, trying to bridge the gap between the model and the reality, so that we're modeling better, right? Because originally, like when the building models first came out, there was really nobody had any skin in the game, if you will. Like, we just said, oh yeah, we're going to do all these things, and these are the answers, and everybody's happy. But without that kind of verification, going back and confirming, yeah, we're hitting this, or no, we're not, and why aren't we, looking at that? And so I think that's something on the engineering side that we continue to struggle with, that we're, using more of AI to kind of close the gap, if you will. And when we have a lot more data than we used to figure that out. So I would say that that's probably the biggest piece. And then secondary, on the operations side, it really has more to do with like fault detection and building controls, and how operations teams use that. Because ultimately, we're all doing more with less. And in many cases, the operations teams are not being properly trained in the new technologies that are suddenly in their buildings. They don't know how to operate it. And ultimately, it fails because there's just not that continuity of the data. So a lot of particularly larger firms are implementing, there's different software programs that are available as an overlay to their building automation that helps with fault detection. So it helps not only identify when things are working outside of the scope, but in some cases they will actually calculate for you how much money it's costing you every day. Because we all know from a deferred maintenance standpoint that a lot of times priorities have to happen, right? So are you gonna fix the thing that's costing you $10 a day, or are you gonna fix the thing that's costing you $100 a day? So those are really the two areas from the engineering side that I would say we're seeing the implementation of AI coming hard and fast. But even on the operations side, again, if the team doesn't know what to do with that data, it still isn't necessarily being, change isn't really being implemented because they don't have the staff to follow up on the issues that are being
This FDD thing, so that's the term, right? I don't know what the second D is for, but that I've heard about this, like, never heard about it before, and I've heard about it 3 times in the last 2 weeks. And I think it's a really interesting, like, how do you engineer, so fault is an anomaly, right? It's an unpredicted thing. It's outside of the scope of the system. How do you deal with things that you don't, that aren't intrinsically something you've dealt with, right? Seems like a super fascinating kind of angle on, oh, let's throw an intelligent agent at it, and you know, I mean, it seems like a really interesting sort of.
It is
yeah.
getting more complicated every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So in a lot of cases, you know, parameters are set. So on a very high level, fairly easy to understand. You know, you might have a room that has a set temperature. Okay, this room is set to be 72 degrees all the time. And okay, now it's 71, and now it's 70, or maybe it's 69. So something's going on with the heat, you know, and so you set that up as a divergence from the set point, and that'll be like your first alarm. Same thing with humidity. Temperature and humidity are fairly easy to track, and can often be that first, oops, something's going on, we need to look at it. Other things including, you know, valves and all other components of the different systems, but sometimes that fault detection is complicated in the fact that some things are conditional on other things. So knowing what are the conditions that are in play at the moment may make something a fault, or it may not. So there is some complicated, you know, kind of the calculations behind that because the last thing you want to do is cause a series of false anomalies, right? So you don't want the staff running around chasing things that ultimately don't exist, because then they're going to start ignoring it, just like any other alarmed BAS system. If there's too much distraction, then they're going to, you know, lose what's important.
But what also is important to think what an anomaly is, right? What is an error? Because, you know, corporate real estate, right? All the offices failed in 2020, right? Because the standard changed dramatically, right? Can we judge them by that? I mean, that's why I think we need something more dynamic that, you know, the anomaly that we say may become the more normal until it becomes anomaly again. So the guidelines where we set have to be flexible to accommodate how people use space. Because as you said, Hersul, I think this is a space we gather together, and tomorrow we have an exhibition here or something, the space needs to adapt because people use the space in a different way.
Okay, so let me throw out another question, which is going to be harder. So I mean, and it sort of riffs a little bit on Costas when you talked about sort of like, you know, who's curating this thing, right? I mean, so specifically, AIs now have autonomy, potentially they have autonomy, they have agency, right? You set them up and they start doing their own stuff, right? And that's going to escalate, right? Yep. So, and on the flip side, there are professions that are going to be curating this thing, right? Can you guys talk a little bit about those two sides? What do you see in terms of the autonomy of this AI, these AIs in the environment, and who do you guys see as, when the client goes, help, I need how to figure this out, like who's going to do that? Is it going to be the architect? Is it going to be like who's going to do what side of that?
I mean, I can give it a try there. I think, first of all, don't be alarmed, we're not there. I mean, AI won't take over the world yet, if ever. So I really think it comes up to the user of the space, because all the data we're talking about, right, when you get from Google Home or everything, is the actual user using the space and feeding you of how they like to use the space. So I think we have to listen to this. We have to begin from there. I always say, don't set up so strict guidelines. I mean, office spaces I'm working with, they always come with a 500 pages PDF, here are my guidelines, do work with that. And I'm like, let's skip that for a second and let's go into the data. Like, you say that everyone's coming to the office every day. Very simple to see. Show me the badge swipes from your office and I'll tell you how many they do actually come. And that way, you know, you start, I mean, we have, I believe, personal opinion, we have to be frugal with space, right? We're in Manhattan, everyone's struggling with space. So do I need these 100 desks, I said earlier, if I only have 50 people regularly coming there? So for me, I think the actual user now is on the front row seat to really define what the strategy is, as long as on the back side we have someone listening, right? Like the occupiers, the people operating the space. So they just listen to this data and adapt on that, and don't wait like the traditional 10-year cycle to say, hell, let's look at my data from the past 10 years, right? Oh, I realize only 50% of the people expected to come to the office. Guess what? It's too late. You wasted 10 years of rent for more space that you actually need. So I really think that will be more power to the user, but again, it's a new tech that it has to follow certain rules. It has to be explainable. I mean, the people we're working with, they're curious if we have a system and there's an assistant and there's AI behind it and gives me a recommendation, how it does it, what data factors in, and who built the logic of that. So always for us is, I even talk like usually you confuse AI with simple automation, like rule-based automation, right? If that, do this. This is decades old. It's not a new thing, right? It just is more dynamic now because it's not just if these do that. If these and that and these and this, then we do this. And that's we get into a more intelligent and more dynamic way of working of the space. And architects, I'm an architect myself, need to listen to that and be more open and flexible to get the data, listen. I mean, very interesting also the terminology used, right, for AI, train and learn. It's a dynamic process that we don't know the output from the beginning. We're just here to set up a method to train and learn, and then we'll come to the output, which we have no idea what this will be.
So just to pull that out, I mean, this is not what software developers, software development companies used to do. I mean, this is a new service that I think basically, I mean, software as a service sort of says, okay, maybe we do things that isn't just a product, but this is really sort of impacting the business that you guys do. Is this sort of, expertise and feedback on what's actually happening in real buildings. So how is that piece of your business evolving? Right?
Well,
is that what people come to you for?
Yes, I mean, I'll give you a simple example, like large enterprise occupier, Fortune 10 company, headquartered here in Manhattan. While I was at WeWork, right, they came to us and say, we have 3 million square feet of an office space in Manhattan, 6,000 employees, 600 and something departments. Each department's up to 13 levels of hierarchy. And now COVID comes in, and each level there have their own mobility ratios, we say. Someone comes 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office. And they came to us and say, we want to do a renovation. That took us weeks to understand what we're dealing with. The teams, the complexity, the mobility patterns, the space, before we even draw a line, do an architectural proposal, a design proposal, and say, you should do that. So I think that's where all the tech and AI, which I probably have to count too many times saying tonight, but really comes into the game and say, let's do some scenario planning in the beginning, comprehend this data, which is very big and broad, run some scenarios, and then come down to come up with a proposal. So that's, I think, where it facilitates right now. And I think people should be open about that, because no one wants to waste time looking into spreadsheets and say who's coming in, who needs it. They just want to do the fun and creative stuff. And I like that. I mean, I'm using AI to take the boring stuff out of me, as long as I'm in control of what's happening there. Because in the boring stuff, there's gold as well. So.
You asked a very interesting question that I think in particular I'm going to call out and highlight and answer. You said, what's kind of the role of the architect within this? And I think you're bringing up some really interesting pieces. And I think in particular, we have a lot of processes and terms, we have building automations, VMS systems, we have commissioning, we have, we're doing consulting models for partners and stuff like this. The question is, what is the role of the architect in this? And I really strongly, truly believe that we should be engaging in kind of what you mentioned earlier. We become experts on a space, and then we move away. The minute that everybody just occupies it, what if we were actually helping craft, the logic, these models, all of these things, and essentially continuing that relationship over the years of the building, the life of the building. So, I mean, I do believe that a lot of times we think of architecture as sort of just pure representation of the physical environment, but I do think we need to engage in the experiential part of the physical environment. And then there's obviously a lot of questions there. Who owns the model? Who updates these pieces? How are all these? Exactly, and that's where I think this is again, my opinion on this, but I do feel what starts to happen when architecture firms are actually holding data about occupancy and like updating things holistically across their clients, it's like there's a lot of questions there, like what's private, what's not, what's training models, what's not, right, as it pertains to kind of the potential role of the architect. I think it's just there's this thing there where architects become experts over 5 to 10 years of like constructing a building, designing it, and then the relationship severs. And I think we need to ask the question of what happens after the fact. Because why doesn't that knowledge transfer just continue? And why isn't there a relationship built there? And obviously there's going to be different business models and different structures. Like I think those are the types of things we should be talking about.
Yeah, I definitely see that. A lot of our clients the majority of our clients are repeat. So we get the opportunity to follow them around the globe a bit and see where things go. And it's sort of, okay, we did this thing in the UK, now we're going to do this thing in America, now we're going to do this thing down in Sao Paulo. And that really helps us because you've got this continuous feedback and you do have this piece of clients coming and going on the journey with you a bit, which is really interesting because it is focused on continual feedback, right? I mean, I think that's the common thing we're all saying is that it is a loop and it is a never-ending loop. And I think AI is also a never-ending loop in a way. And I think, clients can come into it with a certain purpose and they can chat up any of us or any of you for, we need this thing, this is what we're going, this is what we don't know. And it's almost on us to say, okay, well, if we do it in a certain way, we know that we don't know everything that's going to happen 6, 7 years down the way. So here's a system that will help to start to predict, start to tell, start to give you some indicators of what's going on so that your space can work for you and with you and for your crew. So I think in that aspect, really getting to, yes, what's today's purpose, maybe what's the projected near future focus, and then it's really on us to kind of imagine that kind of a little bit further out. I don't think we can go too far out, but I think there is this ability through all the systems we're talking about and the technology that we're talking about, we can actually help people operating the space, investing in the space, kind of trying to plan and trying to take care of their organizations that are going to move into those spaces as best we can through that continual, one, purpose, and two, kind of that continual feedback where we start to actually be able to bring in the predictive or the tells or just bringing in that collective kind of, I can't tell you exactly what I did at my house, but this is what I think you should look at kind of thing. And you start to get to a broader understanding of just where we as the planet are using our resources. Because I think that's a really important part of, especially George, but all of us in just being, we're spending our carbon properly, we're spending our energy properly. Like these are all linked to this in a way as well.
I think you mentioned a couple of specific, you may have, in our preparation, I think you mentioned a couple specific client typologies, healthcare, things like that, where they're already sort of coming at you with their own systems and data, and there's a kind of, do you want to?
Yeah. I think, in this sort of we're sensing things world 2020, it was a very limited crew that would chat to us about this. And I think in the 5 years that have passed, it's really expanded in the typologies that we're seeing. So definitely aviation, transportation. They've got huge assets. The chap with the ladder doesn't want to have to go down to the end of Terminal 4 twice with that ladder. So he wants to look it up and see that it's that kind of access panel and that's the ladder he needs. So you've got that angle of like facilities and we're managing what we need to do. Then you've got the people part that we're chatting about, which is more dynamic, and that's more the office space type piece. Then you've got healthcare, and you've got industrial, and you've got fabrication, and all that crew have expensive machinery that's king or queen, and they're building everything else around that expensive equipment, or the hospitals have got a certain protocols. So you're seeing an asset thing, you're seeing a facilities-driven piece, you're seeing a people in kind of as a team, as a culture piece as well. So I think that that's an interesting part of this that's brewing, is that everybody's, well, you've got this model, you've got this ability, computation does this, AI does this, can't you stick all that together and tell us more and help us be a little bit more confident in our decision making? That used to be one industry or two industries. It's kind of coming up across everybody now, so not that I know what's going to happen, but I feel like 2-3 years from now, we're all going to be talking about this, and it's going to be kind of common that we're all going to be studying this and helping each other out with it.
Okay, I got one more question, and then we'll open it up. So this one is, take it where you will. This is, so pick a time frame of your choosing, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, whatever you feel like. And what do you see the kind of transformational, and what is the world going to be like at that time? And what do we as professionals need, what should we be aware of to prepare for that future? So, forward projection, pick a time frame, what's the world going to be like, and what do we need to do today? Is that too far out there?
Sure. Don't have to overthink it because apparently I don't know. I'd say, think two years from now, I believe, and I hinted at that in the beginning, I really think AI and the technology is a horizontal enabler, right? And I'm just borrowing words from someone who said, back in 50 years from now, right? We used to have fridges or dishwashers and everything, and then all of a sudden electricity came into the game, and then now we don't say I want a dishwasher with electricity. It's there. It's common sense, right? We don't ask for that. I think we're getting very, very rapidly to 2 years down from now, where we're not going to say I need software or a smart home or a smart office, which has an AI engine behind it and can operate the lights and the temperature and everything. It's just part of it. We're not going to even talk about it. I said in the beginning, 4 years before, I would go to conferences like that, and it would be discussion as normal, and then at the end was the AI question. What are you doing with that? The vegetarian menu said in the beginning. And now we're having one dedicated on AI, and I think 3-4 years from now, we won't even talk about it because it will be part of our lives. The data, the way our lives are getting more complex, our spaces are getting more complex, we're more and more in this planet, so the data is heavier and it's a lot much more. So behind the scenes, there will be some level of intelligence and automation. I say automation again because it's not always that smart as we think it is. It's just that someone put the data together and put 1 before 2 and before 3. And then I really think it will be an integral part of what we do. We won't have to talk about it. It will get smarter and smarter. And it's up to us to use it and make ourselves smarter, not make ourselves dumber, and making ourselves non-needed. The whole idea about human in the loop, which is an important thing in technology right now, which is someone human controlling what's happening and the output, and manipulating and tweaking there. So I really think we're just 2 years down from the point that we won't even talk about it that much. My opinion. We'll talk again in 2 years.
I don't know the time frame, but I'll ground us in maybe some near-term thoughts. I think we'll get really used to giving unstructured feedback and not expecting direct output back. I think we're going to be used to thinking in more non-deterministic systems and being able to be okay with probabilistic systems, which I feel I do love what you've been saying, Sarah, because I think a lot of architecture as well, and the way that we're so used to command and control, or we're so used to kind of more traditional automation. What happens when we're all able to give feedback into a building, but not necessarily expect major change, but over time there'll be kind of evolution to the way that starts to incrementally adapt itself, or maybe an evolution in use over 2 years or 3 years. I think that I really hope actually that we can start, maybe as our systems get more connected, do standards actually start to influence systems on an individual building or individual home level, or where energy efficiency is actually just kind of pulled itself into the input of all of these in a standard way, as opposed to hey, we have documentation, we have to follow the documentation. How does that start to become part of the soup of inputs? And I think that I don't. The thing that's always very tough and very interesting, and I think holistically as a profession, and that we always have to contend with, is how the personal rationalizes to the communal, and the entirety of it's sort of the actors at play. It's me, us, and the building itself. And that relationship is going to be very interesting to start to understand what's mine, what's ours, what's yours, and what's the building's. So I think those are the types of things where I'm very intrigued to see how they collectively. I don't think anything will change, but I think everything will change. So
that's a lot to unpack. So hopefully somebody else can pick on some of that. I do want to pick up on one thing you said, which I just saw this article, but you can Google it. Knowledge is dead. It was in Psychology Today, and it doesn't mean that knowledge, that there will no longer be knowledge, but this idea that which has been true since, I guess, the Enlightenment, that, truth is out there and humans uncover it, right? And there is that the world sort of acts in this sort of probably deterministic fashion, and that knowledge is structured around that assumption that the world is deterministic, right? And that with this onslaught, and I think this is really one of the things that AI is really changing, is that need for a deterministic model in the background. And in some ways, I think that provides a new sort of possibility for people who don't, people always are, humans are deterministic and non-deterministic, right? Left brain, right brain, whatever. But the possibility that this could actually unleash a different type of knowing, and that maybe the non-deterministic side of humanity is actually what's going to come to the fore out of this new way of knowing, is, I think, a hugely interesting possibility for AI.
I think just to add a little bit to that, I don't remember who said it, but somebody mentioned interfacing with these models is almost like archaeology. I do love that as a metaphor for thinking about how we sort of have emergent knowledge, things that we just don't even expect would be there, or emergent behaviors, and I think that's where this starts to change the conversation.
I think from the where to we'll go with 2 years, and where architects will be in 2 years. 2 years, 2 years. I like that. That sounds good. Nothing too committal. I think it's really our engagement beyond design. I think it's this continual engagement, and I think for the practice and for our profession, it's going to stretch our boundaries. We're going to stick with clients after they've moved in because we want to help see what's happening and fine-tune things. But then you've also got this coming back to spaces, and maybe if you specialize in a certain type of building, or you stick with a certain client as they move around, you've got this kind of insight that expands the architect's role into thinking about the humans in the space. And I think that that's something that this is going to bring more to the forefront because of what do I need, what do you need, what do we need. I think that is really going to start to drive it. And I think that's exciting because it's not about architecture as an object, it's architecture as place and space, and kind of gets you back to all the reasons we all became architects. So for me, it's a very exciting piece, and I think for the future of the practice, anybody that's out there that's in school or just graduated, definitely dig into the data part of things and how that don't just do the data part, do the data part plus design, because that's where the value is going to be for architecture to sort of come again and grow.
Sure. Again, being the engineer in the room, one of the things, as well as for my ASHRAE Society year, is going to be focusing on decarbonization for existing buildings, right? I think we all know that existing buildings prove to be, or will prove to be, if you haven't done a whole lot of work in the existing building field, a challenge, because they're all unique, and what that, kind of path forward to net zero, lowering our carbon footprint is going to look like. Although we're kind of working on what I would call a playbook, there is still, just unique situations that are going to have to be accounted for. And so I'm really hoping, in the next 3 to 4 years, that we can continue to develop tools that help gather the data of these existing facilities, because let's be honest, in most cases, we don't have drawings. We might have a couple of sequences of operations, but nobody really knows who designed it and why they work the way they work. And so it's really a big mystery. It truly is a black box when we go in and start trying to evaluate what a building is doing from a baseline standpoint. So I've seen different things. I have different contractor friends where they have the 360 cameras, and they'll go through, and in most cases, though, that's the surfaces that they see. So those are really helpful in new construction when the walls are still open and the ceilings aren't in, because you can see where all the things are before the walls go in and the ceilings go in. But I've asked a couple of questions because I've seen different demos, and I'm like, well, what about existing buildings? Where you can't see the equipment? Oh yeah, we can't, we still don't see it. Yeah. And so, kind of looking at what kind of tools, because honestly, we need something that's going to be cheaper from the front end for owners to want to invest in it, because really they want to invest their money in what the new is going to be, right? They're going to renovate the space. What is it that they're hoping to gain? They're not necessarily going to want to spend a lot of money on gathering that data. But ultimately, if you don't plan, you're going to fail, right? It's just the whole adage of failing to plan is planning to fail. And so, how do we go about getting that data up front so that we can make good decisions based on, is some of the infrastructure sound? Do we need to gut it all? That has vast implications on what that project budget might be, that might be able to put more finishes in if they can keep half the ductwork, working on those kind of things. So I'm really hoping that as we continue to mine the data, that we're going to come up with some tools that will help us to better see our existing buildings and to see what they can be moving forward.
Awesome. So we have at least 15 minutes, okay, before we head to the mixer part. We don't seem to have a roving mic. How do we do that? Oh, there's a roving mic. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Hello?
I guess
Hello?
I will row.
Yeah, I actually gonna speak for the virtual attendants first because they wouldn't be able to join. So there is a question from the webinar. I'm gonna summarize because it's very long. It's basically asking whether our scope of today's discussion are mainly focused on kind of how AI impacts the built environment in a management-driven perspective, because we talk about ASHRAEs, and ASHRAE is traditionally more focused on sort of monitoring the change, whether we're going to discuss things such as life, sort of a responsive built environment, and how AI could potentially make operable louvers more, I think, cost-effective, and operable vents, things that's more about kind of a live feedback built environment.
Mostly because I've been working on automation the past few years. Oh, thank you. I think it's very expensive to get to the point in which architectural robotics as like lots of endpoints within a building exist. I think that's like totally where it would be great to go there. I think potentially being able to have systems that can help rationalize and actually provide really quick value in that regard can maybe actually allow for architectural robotics to become more available everywhere. I think in the meantime, I do like what you were mentioning about like the very structured automation type. Like I would love to really take that metaphor of architects programming a space like to the next level, where we would turn around and say like, hey, watch out for my dog when my dog leaves the like backyard, and then if that's the case, just like let me, trying to basically allow for instruction to help with automation rather than fixed kind of very deterministic systems, I find will be very interesting across scales and across application spaces. I think that's where it's kind of the standards piece I'm really intrigued by, because it's like, how do we use those as sort of like fuzzy inputs, and then allow for all of the other inputs to influence on a like highly personalized level per building how it's going to react.
But it feels, so I got these, like, just to the Louvre thing, I got these $60 devices that will open and close your Venetian blinds for you, right? I mean, this is what you guys, I mean, so this idea of like the human experience, I mean, it's being handed to actual end users to make this stuff themselves, right?
And I think that's, to your point, that's where this gets very tricky, because so many times, especially in platforms like smart home, endpoints are like assumed to be what they are, but like in the case of like a smart switch, you don't know what's plugged into it. But how can user feedback actually allow them to be like, oh, this is my heater versus my lamp, and that context actually completely should change how that reacts, right? And I think what's interesting is like today that's very sort of like one-to-one, like how do we get to the point in which that could potentially evolve over time, or you can have a better dialogue with it. So.
Yep, Michael, and then
Thank you very much for a wonderful.
State your name and what you do.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Caton, architect-ish, more technologist, work in AEC startups, and I'm also a member of the Future of Practice Committee. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. A point was made early about does a client want to solve the $1,000 a month problem or the $100,000 a month problem? And what that made me think of was that in most organizations, the resource that is the most expensive for any organization is the people. And I wonder if you could speak to your experiences helping clients kind of visualize waste or resource consumption as it pertains to kind of people. And I think about just an example of, I forget where I saw this, but some company had created a little like Google Calendar add-in where it tallied up the total cost of the people in a meeting as a way of discouraging people from having like unnecessary meetings. And another example of some startups installing CO2 sensors in their meeting rooms because above a certain threshold, like we just demonstrably get dumber because there's not enough oxygen feeding our brains, as a way of setting a threshold for like when we need to cut this conversation off because we are not operating at like in an optimal way. And I'm wondering, you all are very much operating in that space. If you could speak about your experiences kind of helping clients kind of see the real cost of these spatial impacts.
I think it was for you.
No, it's interesting because, again, it kind of comes down to this less is more, right? Or we're doing more with less. And so one of the things that we found out, kind of by accident with COVID is the fact that most buildings had so much deferred maintenance, they weren't even close to being able to maintain a safe environment, to have people come back to the building safely, right? I mean, COVID happened, we all went home. Like we said, we went home, we came back, we went home. And there were a lot of health concerns with that just because, well, A, there was a lot we didn't know at the time, but there were just so many little things that you just over time had not been addressed, and so when people came back to the building and they realized, oh, well, the outside air damper and that air handler hasn't worked for, if we go back to the trend data, at least the last 6 months that that we've been looking at these things. Because one of the things that there's kind of a misnomer about is that if you're sitting in a space and you're generally comfortable, you may or may not have any fresh air going to that space. If you're comfortable, it's a function of the temperature and the humidity, is not necessarily a function of the amount of fresh air in the space. So yes, so putting in CO2 sensors is a good way to be able to monitor that. We have actually done a lot of kind of post putting in those kind of sensors to get better, because in a lot of cases, owners are going to go as cheap as they can as they're putting the building in, and then they may realize that they're really just, they don't have the sensors, they don't have the data that they really want to be able to maintain and manage that building going forward. And so we've had quite a few kind of retrofits, if you will. But the other piece too is sensors going out of calibration. People think, oh, well, I put this in and it's good, and 5 years later, it's not. They're trying to maintain a certain amount of outside air, but that damper, maybe that louver isn't really tight to the access. It says it's modulating, but it's really not. So there's a lot to that as far as yes, there's the ability to go in and gather that data to put in sensors and things kind of post occupancy to get more of that information, but without somebody really looking at the systems. And what we're finding now, particularly with newer technologies, is that there's huge training gaps, particularly in our schools. We can't have the people pushing the brooms trying to run the energy, the energy systems, because they don't have it. They don't know what it does. And while some cities and towns are coming on board and hiring like an energy manager for like an entire town to manage multiple schools and municipal buildings, many others don't. And so we really are struggling with that in the industry, is making sure that the folks that have to run these now more complicated buildings have the training and the resources to be able to continue to run them.
And just to add to that is people don't understand what the data says as well, right? I was at WeWork when COVID happened and we installed these CO2 sensors everywhere, and I was getting emails, your CO2 is like, I don't even remember, 100 milligram per cubic meter. We're like, wow. And then second question, what should it be? Do we know? I mean, we didn't know what's the standard. That's what's happening right now. We say utilization of your office is 80%, and you think, oh, 100 is the best, right? Was it ever 100%? So trying to explain what the trend was, what the pattern is, and what is expected to be is also an important part before having all this smart automation and stuff like that. Maybe your home was always very hot and very warm, right? And you never paid attention. Now we know how it fluctuates during the day, but you're never there in the morning, so you never experience the hot temperature. So it's all about what the norm should be. Now we start realizing what it should be or what it is. So
Yeah, I just got to throw in, the term waste just has so much predisposition that, I mean, who gets to define what waste is, as a multi-objective optimization, it's just, the more you know, the less clear, like, but it also seems like it's a very value-oriented, it's a very value-driven statement. Right? Anybody else on that one? We have the lady in front. We have a mic. We're good to go.
All right, hi, my name is Abby Suckle, and like everybody else here, I was trained as an architect and had the wonderful opportunity to practice for many years. AI is essentially a paradigm change, and it went from being scary to something that people are now, ooh, let me get ChatGPT to write a reference, and what it's become is like a very good intern. And you turn around and you let it do all the things that you really don't want to bother with, that would take too long and are complicated. Now, as an architect, the one thing we didn't really get to today is what are the skills, because architecture is super bespoke, and no matter how many studio apartments you do, it turns out the next one is somehow different. And it doesn't really make that much difference. So you say to yourself, what are all the awful things that would make my day better and make my life more efficient, like checking shop drawings and building, BIM sort of helps with coordination in big things, but it doesn't always help. Those are the kind of things that you wonder, is anybody doing work on to make your life for, how do I get, what are my material choices in some situations, and how do I make sure the contractor's giving me the right stuff? To make, to make sure I don't make mistakes. Is anybody working on that stuff now at the moment in your firms?
A wee bit.
Good.
I would say, and I've said this to all my bosses, all of them. I'd be interested to know what you think about this, but I think that AI has started with what can everybody use, right? So it got to text, it got to numbers, it got to financial, then there's like very narrow AI, meaning that it's very, like my dentist uses AI to compare my pictures of my teeth every year, right? Just picture matching recognition stuff. So the fundamental like capabilities of AI have been built for commercialization, right? Like it's a business. So they've built it for words, they've built it for numbers, they haven't got yet really to 3D. And the way that those files are structured. So I'd say that it's coming, but I would say that architects aren't going to pay a whole lot for AI, and there might not be a whole bunch of other people wanting that type of AI, at least that it's not that broad yet. It is coming, but I haven't seen super compelling pieces come out yet. There's sort of startups that are gaining some traction, I would say, but it's not completely solid yet. I think one thing I could say that at Gensler we're doing with AI that is out there is like using the the image generation, the video generation, just to tell stories, to get clients to understand quicker what we're talking about, what we're trying to explain, and like all the options. So you can do that now, to your point about what's quicker, what's making my life easier, you can do that now in half an hour versus spending the next 3 days coming up with, here's 20 different options of why you want this space laid out this way so that you can do all these different things that you've said you would potentially do in this space. So I think from that side is where the real lift is, and then just on the LLM side of things, just language and going through big chunks of guidelines. And then sussing out what you need out of that 500-page PDF or whatever. I think that's kind of where we are right now with it. And then pairing up disparate data sets, but that's less, here's a tool, go have it, and more on the back end, maybe the us's of the world are kind of using it for tasks, but it's not an easy button. It's more of a hybrid system of our knowledge plus the experiences. Just saying this bit's kind of cumbersome, let's use it to enable things. So I think it's a lot in that realm, and then you get to sort of the predictive and the machine learning pieces.
I think I actually really love what you said about that our 3D, output is essentially not well structured for this. And I think what you're hitting on, which maybe is kind of the interesting direction that this all might go, is like we lack ground truth in a lot of these. Like we don't have large data sets to understand like what a great studio apartment is like on a base level, and then you add in
Shop drawing checking, where you have to compare model numbers
And I think what you're hitting on, which is actually like a really great theme here, is there's different application spaces across the entire stack, from like, design to construction to delivery to post-occupancy, where I feel it's a very horizontal technology that will have completely different impacts in different parts of our processes.
I just want to make one techie observation, which is, the current generation of AI, and I think everybody knows AI is 50, 70 years old, the current generation has been trained on text. None of them know anything about geometry yet, and they're incapable of computing on geometry. Now, that statement may already be dated, but it is coming, and that is the piece that is going to change our world profoundly, is when it can do spatial reasoning, and rest assured people are working on it, and they're throwing money at it, and once they see benefit, they're going to throw more money at it.
And they are, we are as well, like computer vision, putting down 10 different versions of layouts and tell you which is the most efficient, what has the less waste of circulation, what has the most optimal lighting condition. Then it's up to the designer, the architect, or the final receiver of the output to design which is the best for them. So it's not going to tell you pick version 1 versus version 2, but it will tell you what the benefits of version 1, and will tell you there are benefits from version 2, and you make the final decision. So yeah, it can check shop drawings, it can come with the shop drawings ready, it can really compare them. It can be done, but the human in the loop, I said in the beginning, has to be there and say, of these 10 options, which now I know the data and the benefits, option number 5 is the one for me and my customer.
And I think the last thing, I love what you said, Dennis, which is super key, is once that happens, it changes the game. And I think we just need good structured data for our application space, where today so much of this is trained on video and image to essentially approximate for space. And once we start getting to the point in which we can actually structure it and properly figure out how we want to structure spatial information, whether it's for design or whether it's like for kind of post-occupancy, we should be designing that we're the experts on this. So,
I also want to see more on code compliance. Codes have gotten so crazy to try to track. We have cities, towns, municipalities, states, regions even. We have, newer building codes. We have states that have frozen building codes. Things are all over the place, and I think AI is a tool that we could use better to be able to track those changes and the differences between areas. Because, particularly for folks that are licensed in multiple states, good luck. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm hearing we have maybe room for one more question. Okay, one more quick and insightful and amazing out of the park question, and then we're gonna head into the mixing part where we'll just keep going. But we'll do it without mics. So.
Hi, my name is Camilo, and so I think AI is a big blanket, but as designers, I think we mainly use LLMs in stable diffusion, and so I work at SOM, and so one thing that we do is we go to a great length to protect our data, so we don't kind of make our information public into the large language models. And but I wanted to ask you guys, how can we get over that? How can we get over that? Because you mentioned risk earlier, and I feel like it's part of a risk. It's kind of like who owns this data and who gets to use it. And so my question is how do we move past that and start using it more freely?
I was just there was a question I didn't ask, which I'll throw in as well, which is the privacy, what do individuals get to own, right? Who gets to own what? And as an individual in an intelligent space, what do I do, right? But I guess, that general question about, Google. What is Google doing?
Report at me. I would love, on a personal level, I would love a world where we have a relationship between global models and local ones. I think especially in situations where I want to be able to have, for example, something in the home that is customized to me and my household and everybody, but I don't need that necessarily to always go to the cloud. Starting to think of metaphors, we have all of these things that are relating to the home. What if we had some of that more privatized data in that regard? So I'm just thinking of that as mostly as an architect. What is that relationship between public and private? We have those within our homes, we have those within our spaces. How do we start to think of our data in some of those pieces? And the reason why I think there's some benefits to what goes up and what doesn't is particularly for standards for compliance for things that relate to every single building will have to accommodate this type of, piece of it, whether it's like energy efficiency, whether it's, I don't know, just like lots of pieces. And that's the relationship that I'd love to like unpack. So what is mine and what is kind of ours for the benefit of, I think, performance or stuff like that.
I'm going to get this reference wrong. It is the, God, what is it? The information, I can't remember the name. It's a woman out of Harvard. Anyway, the point is that, this idea that I give my data away in return for free services is a decision, right? It's not inherent to the technology, as you said, just to break down this ideal. Local, the model that I own that is different than the model that my company owns, that different than the model that, right? This is doable, right? It's just, it's a decision that we have to make as consumers and as citizens, right?
I mean, the opt-in versus the opt-out model, right? Usually in every software or something, there's 80% of the population that goes with the default, which is maybe is it opted in or is it opted out? And there's another 20% of the population that has a very strong opinion about opting in or opting out of that. So what is going to be the default? I mean, this is changing as well, right? We went to very kind of, I'm going to opt into that, and then we go into now a model that the default is opt-in already, and I have to take the conscious decision to opt out of this. So this will change. I mean, we're getting more familiar.
If there was an AI watching us, how do you opt out?
Oh, there's one right here.
Just tell.
Yeah. Well, can you? That's a very good question. I mean, can you really? I don't know. I mean, I also put something else as food for thought. What about all the data that we're totally unaware of? An architect were doing a design, or everyone was just managing our place. All the data that we never knew about, the CO2, the temperature, the lighting conditions. So, I mean, that's for me is equally problematic from like sharing too much than knowing too little as well. Because so much data that we have made my home better, which I didn't know. I just needed these blinds in the south-facing window, which someone have told me how warm that thing goes every day that I'm in the office, right? So now I know. So it's also something to bring into the equation that now we know more, which is maybe it's a good thing. I don't know. I mean, there's a question mark at the end of this.
What do we do with that knowledge?
Yeah.
True.
I mean, it's interesting. When I was at the Media Lab, we worked with the school in Andorra, and it was very interesting. We built this like little AR like thing where you can kind of, the kids were able to look at the sensors and see the states of like CO2 or the sun, and it was very interesting in the way that they started to like adjust things like, oh, I can open my window, I can do this. And I think to your point, there's something really, really great there about the potential for me to access something like this. Like I can dial my radio and turn it on, and there's like a stream of information going on. Like what is that relationship with our buildings?
Yep.
Okay, so what? One more question. Okay, bring us home. Bring it home.
And I wanted to see where this was all headed. I'm Paul Mankiewicz. I have built maybe more green infrastructure in New York than most anyone. I've been on CASE doctoral committee since 2008, so I wanted to see where you folks are going. It's a terrible question, and I'll retract it in a second. But I love what you said about the three-dimensionals, of course. How do we get, I have designed and built basically green roofs and the rest. How do you do anything in 3D? But the terrible question is, will something like AI ever incorporate Ashby's requisite, basically requisite law of requisite variety? Can the law of requisite variety, one of the founders of literally the whole internet system, Ross Ashby wrote that out. What it means is basically there's a requirement to meet variety with variety. Everyone who designs anything knows this. How to do it is another question. So it's just exactly like the 3D thing. It's the ichthyosaurs and the dolphins got it exactly right, however they did it. I don't know how we're going to do that, but can we take something like a matrix and see what the essential required variety is to get other things out of that matrix? It's just a curious thing. It does something like this now. Do you see? Are we close to that, or is the same thing about what you want to give away or not? Because if AI could do that, it could potentially incorporate some of what we thought.
I know, this is a really good question. I'm totally stumped, though.
I think it's great because it addresses something we didn't even talk about, the end user, right? We're talking about amazing things you're using, but what difference makes for you. So AI, I think, and that's purely my opinion, it's not so, how to say, so universal for everyone right now. I mean, it's as good as the data we have to train it and feed it. And there's so much unstructured data out there, which we're not feeding it into yet. So I don't see, and I say this very often with my team, it's not as smart as we think it is. Still my opinion. It will get smarter because it has the way to process volume in a very good speed. But I don't think it's that inclusive right now. I mean, give you a very simple example. Like my mom the other day said, I take this medication, I have some side effects. Can you ChatGPT that to tell me what's on? I'm like, Mom, I wouldn't trust that. I said, but no, it knows everything. No, it doesn't know everything. It does not. I mean, it's, as you said, open the hood and see what's under there. It's not that smart. It's maybe can be one of the smartest things we develop or one of the dumbest things we develop as a civilization, but it's just a response to a time we live in, which is very packed with data and information, which we cannot make sense without it, I think. So to your question, I don't think it's ready there to consider everything which is out there. So I wouldn't trust it that much. I like to be a little bit skeptical on that, but also open to the fact that it can facilitate my life, like the shop drawings and the simple things.
So I think over the break, we should ask ChatGPT to answer this question. I'm very serious, because it's going to say something. Okay, I think if we're not careful, we'll get the lights turned off on us. So.
Talk and ask even harder questions to panelists or discuss whatever interests you coming out from today's discussion. I do want to add one note. So this is a series of events. We had the first event in March. This is the second event. There will be at least 2 other AI Salon coming up for the second half of the year, scheduled in September and sometime in Q4. Yeah, so please just check, just follow up or like come back. We like to have more conversation. This is a discussion. We're not looking for an answer. We're just looking for gather people who are thinking about this and come and discuss together. And thank you all for coming. Yeah.
Thank you to our amazing panel and to you guys.